Hello everyone. This is Paula Marie Young, award-winning mediator and legal educator whose purpose is to teach people negotiation and mediation skills so they can lead happier lives, solve problems more effectively, and resolve conflict holistically with wisdom, skill, and heart. So we're now talking about caucus. And the textbook authors put this in the context of an impasse-breaking move. And that's true, but I also want you to think about it in terms of one more strategy or option in terms of information gathering and party perspective taking in the earlier stages of the process. And in early webinars, I've certainly talked about using caucus to just make sure that people have gotten everything that they want to say out on the table. But now we're talking about it in some ways in terms of, now that we're in the bargaining stage, how do you use it to figure out, first of all, what are the barriers to settlement? Why aren't people moving? But more importantly, it's pretty key when you're doing distributive bargaining and you're trying to divide the pie. It's almost impossible to do that in joint sessions. And so that is almost always where you use it, in later stages of the negotiation, maybe after you've resolved a lot of the interest-based issues and you're now down to that last issue, which is the how much money is going to get paid. So let me get my slides and we'll talk about this topic. All right, so the readings cover 2 chapters and got just a real short summary of the mechanics of caucus. This is something you should put in your mediation binder so you have it. Additional class prep, there's one video clip I want you to watch. We will talk about the different techniques. I'm going to demonstrate them in the Takishi Maria role play, and as I said, you're going to have a chance to practice them in cross v rope. Frankly, if you're kind of sick of that role play at this point, I can give you another one and you can practice with that. All right, so one of the first things we want to talk about is how we conceptualize our role and our use of caucus. And it often depends on certainly our attitudes, but it often depends on the nature of the dispute. So in litigated cases, you're going to see heavier use of caucus because they're dealing with a lot of financial issues. In, let's say, family cases, often you'll see mediators who make the choice, a directive choice, that there's not going to be any caucus. That's because the mediator has decided that these parties need to be able to become self-sufficient problem solvers, and they're going to have to do it together in joint session. So just be aware that there are different attitudes about how much caucus to use. The text authors suggest to keep the parties in joint session to the maximum extent possible. I certainly agree with that. It's certainly my practice. But the things to consider are whether the dispute is cool or hot, whether there's a lot of strategic posturing or inflated demands, little discussion of interest for some reason, no need or desire for a mediator evaluation, which would speak more towards joint session, and significant time pressure, which could speak to either joint session or caucus. You have to remember that caucus is a unique feature of this particular ADR process. So you want to make a distinction between caucusing during the information gathering stages, as I mentioned earlier, and caucusing during the bargaining negotiation stage. Now, the authors admit that it is potentially an artificial distinction. but I do think it's still conceptually helpful. So questions to consider in making the choice between joint session and caucus. What are the conflict dynamics? How far apart are the parties actually? Are they willing to reveal more about their interests than they have to this point in joint session? And do I need simply to coach one party about her tactics? And then that will cause more movement in joint session. The advantages of caucus: it offers a respite from a high level of hostility. Given the promise of confidentiality in this process, parties are likely to be more open in private than they would be in joint session. It's a safe setting for more fearful parties, and it's a safe place to discuss strategies for disclosing potentially inflammatory information. Other advantages: it can create intimacy and rapport between the mediator and the parties. It allows the mediator to probe for, interpret, and evaluate information without the worry of appearing biased. Allows a more directive or evaluative approach, and allows working on a single issue zero-sum negotiation more efficiently. So this is why you see it a lot in litigated cases. Allows mediator the chance to translate or reframe toxic or upsetting statements. So what happens is, let's say somebody in one caucus room says, you know, that person is a selfish SOB. Well, the mediator walks down the hallway and now says something very different to the party, but conveys maybe the essence of what's been said. Bob's concerned that you may not show as much orientation towards others that is required in this particular circumstance. I don't know, something like that. Allows the mediator a chance to address problematic behaviors that are impeding the process. So is there a negotiating style or some approach that they just need negotiation coaching? And so this is a place that you can do it. The disadvantages of caucus. Well, first of all, it eliminates the face-to-face contact that most likely helps the parties be persuaded and develop empathy. Joint sessions allow parties to watch the mediator show empathy for both perspectives of the parties, and the joint sessions allow everyone to gather information based on the reactions of people to what has been said. So, you know, the problem with being in caucus is you're constantly trying to translate what's going on, instead of the parties having that, you know, in the moment experience. Caucus hinders the ability of parties who have an ongoing relationship to be more self-sufficient problem solvers in the future. Other disadvantages: can heighten indirect hostility towards the other party, because now in this private setting they can make more self-serving statements and they can make misleading assertions about the missing parties who don't have a chance to respond. This is, you know, if you're trying to get people to assume responsibility, caucus can be helpful for that, or people can even engage in more self-justification behavior. Early caucus can set the expectation for continued use or overuse of caucus. So for a while, I think I've mentioned this, or I was hearing about this style where the mediator was throwing people immediately into caucus without even giving them an opportunity to do a joint session of party perspective exchange. And it just never sounded right to me. I wouldn't do it. I think the theory was that people were highly positional and it just got them angrier and more upset and more deeply set in their positions. And my response to that is, maybe it was just a matter of the mediator not being as skillful as they might need to be. It may cause a party to stew or become suspicious when the mediator is in the other caucus room. So you have to again assume that after this thing is over, the parties may talk about their experience in caucus. So you want to continue to be highly professional. You want to be very balanced in the way that you're doing things. You'll see in the protocol that you're trying to keep track of how much time you're spending with each party and make that time reciprocal, or if you're spending more time with one person, checking back in with the other person and just reassuring them that it's just taking more time and that you are mindful that they're sitting there, and then letting them know what they might do with the additional time that you're taking with the other side. Creates a situation in which only the mediator has all the information, which can lead to manipulation. So, conducting the caucus. So, plan the goals for the caucus. Why are you doing this? It's not something that you're just doing for the heck of it. Prepare the party who will be leaving the room. Explain the rules of confidentiality. Build trust and rapport. Work on communication problems. Encourage meaningful conversation. Explore the wisdom of sharing any information that's come out. Close the caucus and determine what information you may share with the other side. Decide the next format, either continued caucusing, now moving to the second party, or return to joint session. Almost always you're at least going to have some sort of caucus with the other party, even if it's fairly short. And that's primarily, again, to make it feel balanced and to reduce any suspicions. First of all, if somebody hasn't had the caucus experience, they're not going to know what it looks like, and they're going to have suspicions about it. So by doing it with the second person, even though you don't feel like you really need to, you're giving them a chance to see what has happened in the other room. Okay, plan goals for the caucus. So I'm going to go through each of these steps in more detail. So one of the questions is, with whom do you meet first? Will you explain the decision and how? What are you trying to accomplish in the caucus? To learn more information, to understand a party's reticence in joint session? What questions will you ask? What resistance might you encounter? And you have to consider the roles of the attorneys in caucus. So who goes first? So the textbook says, well, it could be the side whose bargaining position is most flexible. Or it could be the party who gave the second party perspective earlier in the process. So now you're kind of reversing the order and letting them go first. And it could be the person who initiated the case or the mediation. This is not unusual in litigated cases. Or if you're trying to maintain your neutrality and none of these other rules might apply, you can simply say, it's my habit to meet with the person with the person who's closest to the door. Or if you really want to meet with the other person first, then you can just say, it's my habit to meet with the person first who is furthest from the door. So it looks neutral, but you're actually making a very directive choice about who's going to go first. You can also make it elicitive and say who would like to go first. And then, because you're going to be even-handed in it, it really in some way shouldn't matter who goes first. I don't think it matters that much. Okay, so how do you prepare the party who will be leaving the room? You want to send or escort them to the place where they will wait. And you have to make sure it's out of earshot of the caucus communication. So you may not want to have the second room right next door to the other room if you can hear through the walls. Give a rough estimate of the time you plan to spend with the other party, and be sure to record the time begins. Sure that person that you will spend a similar amount of time with that person in the second caucus. Let them know what they can do during this downtime. So can they make calls, answer email, take a walk, grab lunch, etc. And obviously that depends on the amount of time. Some people will have things that they can do, maybe a puzzle or a Nerf ball basketball hoop, just to maybe release some kinetic energy and just move around during this time. Assign homework if time can be productively used. So can they locate additional information that they've discovered they need, invite a missing party, list things not yet discussed that they want to discuss, or if it's in the bargaining stages, you want them to discuss the next round of concessions and how they're going to justify any move that they're going to make. You want to explain the rules of confidentiality. This is a confidential process. This is the advantage of it. And there's typically two approaches. Nothing will be revealed unless the caucusing party gives permission, or anything may be revealed unless the caucusing party directs the mediator to keep specific information confidential. Now, I like the second one because it's much easier to have the person say, don't tell him that, and then you know everything else you can disclose, rather than trying to go through the whole caucus conversation and figure out what you have permission to disclose, okay? Be sure the disclosure rules are clear to the caucusing party to avoid perceived betrayals, and separate your caucus notes from regular notes. So some people take them on a separate pad of paper that's a different color, or they'll take them in a different color pen, but they'll be sure and try and keep it separate so they know what is confidential. So you're going to, in conducting the caucus, you're going to work on building more trust and rapport. You're going to invite an open communication from the party about any topic he or she chooses. So, you know, even though you might have a goal in mind, you may still start this process at the top of the questioning funnel. Is there anything you don't feel comfortable talking about in joint session that you would like to share now? You want to check in. How is the process going for you? So you can just have process talk. Can I do anything to increase your comfort? So are they hungry, tired, need to make a call, need to use the restroom, whatever it might be. And as far as building trust and rapport, after you give them this opportunity to talk more generally, then you can start to shift to the mediator chosen topics. So if the mediator has a long list of goals, you may want to plan several rounds of caucus so that the other person does not have to wait too long for his or her chance at caucus. So there's nothing that says it has to be all done in one caucus. You can do, 10 minutes with one, 10 minutes with the other, then come back and do another 10 minutes on whatever other issues you want to discuss, then go do 10 minutes with the other side, and so on down your list of issues until you work through them. Work on communication problems. So you want to encourage disclosure of additional information, interpret and reframe inflammatory statements, address problem behaviors hindering process. Overly belligerent, reluctant to talk, unable to communicate clearly are 3 examples of that. Encourage meaningful conversation. The format and self-revealing conversation and disclosures that will encourage parties to look at their situations differently, reveal and respond to new information, and consider and recognize the need for change. So, you can see how you're going to be using some of these persuasion tools that we talked about in the last class with these parties in this process to get them to begin to consider the need for change. As far as encouraging meaningful conversation, they suggest the following approaches. Use open-ended questions. So we want to look at our Barquet chorus. Explain, explore with me, share with me, walk me through your thinking. How would it feel to be done with this dispute? Avoid yes-no leading questions. This is from the textbook. It's obviously sounding very familiar. Explore the wisdom of sharing information. So they've been reluctant to give you this information before, but now you may have to talk to them about how it could really help them to be more forthcoming. And they may want to withhold the information because they think they can, spring some surprise at trial. And with modern discovery, that's pretty hard to do anymore. Maybe they're afraid that it's inflammatory, so this is a chance for you to kind of reframe it into more neutral language and still preserve the information and its value. Maybe it's embarrassing to the party, maybe it shows weakness or creates a risk of exploitation. So, we talked about this a bit in Module 3. you know, you're always balancing that tension between disclosing enough information to create value, but to do it in a way that maybe protects you when you shift to distributive bargaining and there's the risk of exploitation. And remember, in the widget role play that we did, there was a lot of sort of, here's the information I can give you. I'm going to protect this. Maybe as we get closer and trust each other more, I can give you more information. I'll see what I can do. You know, so you were being kind of cagey. And in the PI one, there was, I can give you a range, what I think is a range of possibilities, and here's the objective criteria that supports it. What do you think the range is? What's your support for it? So there wasn't a lot of fixed sort of numbers that were being exchanged in those earlier parts of the conversation. Okay, but by this time, maybe it's time to be more specific, is what I'm getting at. All right, the mediator can explore the nature of the information, its potential for helping or hurting the process if shared, and when and how it should be shared. So does the mediator share it, or does the party share it? And so in the video clip, you'll remember that Cutrona encourages Frank to share information about Connie and Sam, his older employees that may screw up from time to time. Okay, so you close the caucus and you determine what information you may share with the other side, and you execute the second caucus. So you confirm what information may be or may not be shared with the other side. You escort out one party and you escort in the second party. You start the process again and you fight the temptation to immediately reveal what the mediator has learned in the other caucus, even if the mediator has permission to reveal the information. So you need to respect the pace of this process and the symmetry of the dance. So you start at the top again. You do exactly what you did in the last one. Invite open-ended questions about what topic they want to talk about. And you talk about the process and is there anything that I can do for you, etc. And then you have to decide what's the next format. So are you going to continue caucusing or go to joint session? If you return to joint session, you need to coach both parties about what information will be disclosed and how to do it. So they are anticipating what's going to happen in the next joint session. All right, so decide the next format, continued caucusing or joint session. So who makes the choice? Is it always the decision of the mediator? Under what circumstances might you elicit that process choice from the parties? When should the mediator defer to that preference? What about negotiating with parties about conditions for returning to joint session? What might that conversation entail? So you actually make it part of the negotiation. I guess on this, I'm going to be more directive. I am going to use my judgment about whether or not it's time to get back into joint session. My guess is if you give that choice to most parties, they're going to stay in caucus. And I want to try and get them back into joint session just as quickly as I can. Again, it really does depend on the nature of the case. Litigated cases tend to get into caucus fairly early and stay in caucus until the final joint session where the parties come together. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, return to joint session. Can yield greater sense of ownership in any agreement reached, can create greater satisfaction with the process, creates a high note ending, and can allow decisions about operational details of agreement. Payment forms, confidentiality of the agreement, any press release the parties want to release, and can be used to prevent a later challenge of the agreement. So this discussion is assuming that you've done a lot of the bargaining in the caucus, you have pretty much reached agreement, you are now coming into joint session to make sure that everything's kind of in place before you go forward. Now, there's one mediator who says you definitely want to bring those parties back into joint session and just confirm in front of as many witnesses as possible that there is an agreement and what the terms are. And this is to prevent a later challenge that the party was coerced into the agreement. You've got a lot of people who can be witnesses other than you if the party tries to challenge the agreement, like in the Bitakas case later on. You want to avoid bringing the parties back into joint session if it's likely to raise hostilities or you have any concerns about the safety of one party. So if you're dealing in a domestic violence context, you're not going to bring them back together again. In fact, you're going to escort the at-risk person to the car and probably let them leave first. Okay. You don't want to return if it's likely to create deal-breaking strategic problems. And you can read about that in the book if you want. Okay, if you do decide to return to joint session, then you're going to begin the joint session with encouraging words. Lots of puppy pats here. You're going to thank the parties for the opportunity to meet separately. You're going to thank them when you leave each caucus, and then you're going to thank them when they come into the joint session for giving you the chance to meet with them. If the parties are still far apart in a bargaining context, caucus context, assure them that an agreement is still likely. So you're still trying to create a sense of hope and success and moving forward. If the parties are close to an agreement, congratulate them on the progress that they have made. Suggest the areas of terms that still need attention. And in announcing any area of agreement, 3 approaches exist. The mediator does it, the mediator invites the parties to do it, or a combination of these approaches. Usually, I think the mediator does it, but... Okay, next class, dealing with impasse, master moves. And among other things, we're going to be describing the safety deposit box technique. And I've also got planned a separate webinar conversation with Bob Creo, who is the inventor of the safety deposit box technique, and he's got lots of other tricks up his sleeve. He's been mediating for, I don't know, a long time, 20 years or something. And so that's a really great thing. I'm really excited about that. Got some additional class prep, some video clips. Let's see. And that's it. Okay, so have a really great week. The workload's not too heavy this week. So this gives you a chance to watch the videos and do your role plays and watch me mediate with Takishi and Maria. So I'll talk to you later. Bye.